we are pattern recognizing creatures. The more patterns you can recognize, the more your brain is going to be able to synthesize all the data that you're seeing. So start learning the patterns, write the patterns down, what they mean, because symbols symbols are there to convey meaning. We
Hmm.
don't start with and make symbols. Symbols reflect
Yeah.
the meaning.
Yeah.
So once you understand that, once you flip that and flip it from, oh, they were just really artistic. Yeah, where did the art come from? Where did the inspiration come from? There has to be something there to inspire you. And
Yeah.
that's what it is. They're reflecting the geometry of the divine, the sacred geometry.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Sacred Travel Podcast. And I am super stoked to have Tyler from Bassforge with me today. And we are going to be talking about cymatics and decoding ancient temple structures. So Tyler is an audio engineer, a music producer, and DJ from Austin, Texas. He holds a bachelor's in computer engineering with minors in physics and mathematics. Worked in data storage after college and found the work soul-crushing. And then started a business doing high-rise window cleaning shortly after. In 2020, nearly put Tyler out of business, which led him to research for something more meaningful. And that led him to start Bassforge to show what he found in an entertaining way that synthesizes his love for music. And I absolutely do encourage everybody of you to visit all of his channels, Bassforge. He really shares a lot of cool stuff, and also check out his new books on esoteric wisdom. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hello, happy to be here.
Yeah, we are so happy to have you because I feel that, the work that you put out is quite unique. I haven't, seen that in any other way. And sometimes it also requires a lot of my brain power to understand what is behind. And I have to say that I'm usually watching your videos a couple of times to really let that process all in. And so also I want to start because and it's a lot. So I don't know how familiar our audience is with cymatics. So I feel that we first should clarify what is cymatics.
So it got popularized, I think it was in the 60s, and it is any method of viewing what sound looks like, the geometry of sound through a medium. It could be metal plate with sand on it. It could be water vibrating on a speaker. It could be manipulating fire or some type of plasma with frequency. There are a lot of ways to do it, but the ways that I use for a lot of my content is mostly the water, and that's basic setup. Anyone can do this at home. You just fill a little petri dish with water and put it on a speaker. Obviously, make sure that it's not going to electrocute you, but
Flood your bathroom.
yeah, it's a it's a really cool little science experiment too. If you have kids, they usually eat it up, and there's a lot of stuff that you can pull out of the geometry of frequency, and my music background kind of helps with that. But when I started looking at, I've always been into ancient history because it's just like, in my opinion, the explanations never really made sense. So I was like, what's really going on here? And as soon as I started putting those two together, you would be absolutely floored to see how many similarities there are between the shapes of the frequencies and stuff that was encoded in the temple walls and all kinds of, architecture around the world, that when you really start looking deep into it, you start to notice that they're, trying to convey something through the shapes of sound. And that kind of led me down, that was really my first introduction into the rabbit hole of trying to figure out what's actually going on.
It's a big black rabbit hole.
It's so big, yeah. And this was really kind of like a nice little flashlight, though. Like if you're going in here and you have not, you have no experience whatsoever in ancient history or sacred geometry or any of that, then I feel like cymatics is a really good gateway into making that make sense. Where before we didn't really have a good way of explaining why these shapes are here, what they mean, and everything that comes with that. But now you can kind of piece things together from a whole variety of traditions that seem to be using the same shapes. And so that's a good intro. If you're unfamiliar with it, there's a lot of content online right now. It used to only be a couple creators, and now there's a lot of really talented people creating a lot of really cool art with just frequency, and you'd be surprised if you look at one, you'll be like, I've seen that somewhere. And that's how it starts. And then you're locked in for life, and now you live in a rabbit hole.
Yeah, yeah. So can you share with us some of your major insights? And you've studied like a many different temples from many different religions or
Mhm.
traditions, I want to say. So what are commonalities that you've seen?
So the gateway, I think, for a lot of people is going to be either cathedrals or Egypt. And for me, since I'm not in Egypt, it was cathedrals, and I was always fascinated from like a little child. I would, whenever we would go somewhere new, I would always point out the cathedrals. We always had to go see the
Yeah.
cathedrals. And after seeing a bunch of them and going, traveling around the world and stuff, I knew there was something like layers hidden in there, and so I started digging in there, and that kind of opened up the more esoteric side of things when you start looking into like Knights Templar, Freemasonry, and stuff like
Yeah.
that, and who's really building these things. That is kind of like the crack that got me into to reading the science, because when you follow that trail back, it ends in Egypt. So you have this gap of time of cathedrals and pyramids, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in between, and you notice that all of these things in between are utilizing the same concept of astronomical alignment. There's always wells under these temples, there's always crypts under these temples, there's always,
Hmm.
they have certain things that they all have their ingredients, and it's called temple science. And cymatics is a huge part of temple science, because if you think about it, there was no, as far as we know, there was no computers back then. So we have to use something to visualize, sound and what's going on, because fundamentally, when you look back at everything, they were very aware that everything is frequency, everything is vibration, and that's been solidly proven today. So their methods of their science was based around using the frequency and the images of frequency to help, decode what's actually going on in reality.
Hmm.
And the keys are these little breadcrumbs that they left in all these temples, and it's not in the what I always tell people is, it's not in the you're not going to find it in the text, you're not going to find it on the walls. They weren't speaking to you that way. They were speaking in geometry. And if you know fundamental concepts of sacred geometry, you can read the structure like a book. And that is the point. That is the real, reason why those things were created, was to have a visual, very, very captivating visual way of teaching these concepts, instead of me sitting in a classroom and watching someone on a whiteboard
Hmm.
draw equations and stuff, and then half your kids are asleep. This was a very interactive way when you're walking through a temple, that you're like, how is this even existing? And then there's
Yeah.
stuff on the walls, and then they can kind of teach you from that. Frequency and geometry are inseparable. So you kind of need those two things to understand. But as soon as you start making these connections, I really do feel like it opens up new pathways in your mind to bring more information in. Because if you see how one thing connects to this thing, then all things start to get their little, tendrils like out, and you can start to
Yeah,
besides that.
completely. Wow, so that's fascinating. So you already say that there is, it's almost like a recipe, kind of like there
Mhm.
is what you said
Yeah.
with the well and the water and like the structures and all of these elements or some of these elements, let's say, are similar.
You have to look at it in a different way, because you can go down the conspiracy route, and we can talk like that all day, but that it's
No, no, we don't
really
do that.
yeah, we're not doing that. I try to stay away from that too, because there's an actual science here, and it has nothing to do with what everybody is talking about. It's more, and the best way I can describe it is anchoring consciousness down into
Yeah,
a
yeah,
terrestrial form, right? And the temples and temple science is based around doing that. And then after you've anchored it to a physical reality, you have to develop that consciousness. It's like a child. You can't have a child and not teach it anything. The child becomes a feral animal, like every animal that we see, in the animal kingdom. So you have to develop this intelligence. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. You can't become a rocket scientist when there's no rocket science to
mm-hmm.
to teach you about rockets. So temple science is there to teach you about consciousness and to develop consciousness. And I would say the most advanced architecture of that is the culmination is a cathedral where the old ancient structures were there for they seemed more on the this was utilitarian. This was that we needed to like there was a strict purpose for this. Like what were we doing in this area? Because this was a vital thing. Egypt or Peru or any of the sites anywhere on earth. There's the ancient stuff was very, very, very by the books, extremely precise, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
then the cathedrals kind of built on that, where if that was the fundamental, the cathedrals added the harmonic details, the tone of the consciousness, right? And this is not just cathedral. This is mosques. You have these temples all over the world. Doesn't matter the tradition.
Hey, everybody, if you are enjoying the show, then you would do me the biggest favor in clicking the subscribe button and engaging with my content so I can continue to deliver these beautiful conversations to you. Thank you so much.
Temple science carried on through all of those. There was actors within each tradition that were practicing the same temple science that was practiced in Egypt, and that got reflected in all kinds of structures. So once you know the markings of it, you can kind of read where those people went. You know, they discovered the temple science and kind of spread it throughout the world, and that kind of proliferated out. And the key there was sound. The key every time you go into a cathedral or a mosque or some very holy site, you notice the first thing you notice is that something sounds odd. It sounds perfectly tuned. If it's a piano hitting a note and it just is dead on, right?
Right on the spot.
Every
Yeah.
one of those ones that is built with those king's chamber in Egypt, all of the structures have these specific places where resonance is the focus, and there's a reason for that. It's interacting. You're the interface with this. The human mind, the human body is an interface with the temple. Temple science is human science. So there's a lot to unpack with that, but as far as like the evolution goes, most people have access to a cathedral somewhere, right? Or you can drive to one. Most people don't have access to the Great Pyramid. So that's so a lot do, but it's kind of expensive to get there. But cathedrals will teach you will is the same tradition as the Egyptian way of doing it.
Okay. So let's imagine we walk into a cathedral. How do we decode the ancient wisdom that's there for us?
So it's whenever I'm traveling, I always, if I see a cathedral, I always look at the top-down layout first because that's the most basic geometry that you're going to see. I'm going to do a little pre-research, right? Most cathedrals are in the shape of a cross,
Yeah.
obviously. But it's not a 2D cross, it's a 3D cross because there's in cathedrals, there's always a crypt. And the crypt is where the ceremonies happen. The upper part, the ambulatory, the nave, the wings, all of it serves a purpose. But the crypt is where the masters went. That's where the ceremonies happen. That's where you got initiated.
The initiations, yeah.
Yes. And then there's always a well. There's always and it's positioned specifically. You'll notice in most like European cities, the cathedral a lot of the times they're laid out right because European cities they do align their roads north, south, east, west. Some cities in America do it too, but often the older ones they didn't do that. So the cathedral's at this weird angle in the city, and every other building around it is in a grid pattern, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely.
Because the cathedrals are aligned. The cathedrals are aligned to a specific astronomical either event or star, or it could be a whole bunch of things. You have to kind of like look in there and kind of decode. So the first two things I look at is what is the layout of the cathedral and where is it aligned to? What direction? Is it straight north south? Is it astronomical north south? Is it the star? Could be a whole bunch of things. But the reason for that is because the I'm sure you've probably seen a lot of the posts that the windows are cymatic patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Have you
Mm-hmm.
seen those?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a specific frequency to that cymatic pattern, and it's reflected in two things: the actual architecture of the window, and then the stained glass. And if you don't know about stained
Yes, that
glass,
makes sense. Yeah.
stained glass is still a mystery to this day. They're still trying to figure out how they got the optical properties of that glass that precise back then, because they're when you go into the European ones at night, it looks like there's a light behind the closed window inside the cathedral. It looks like it's illuminating inside the cathedral versus having lights in. And that is it's a really masterful technique of glass engineering. And what they did in a lot of cathedrals is the way the light hits the rose on specific times of year, they would put little pieces of glass. This is not all of them, but they would put a little piece of perfectly transparent glass in the rose window or another window surrounding it. And whenever the sun hit it correctly, it would shine directly on a brick or something on the floor that was giving you a clue to something else about the temple. So there's layers to knowledge that were encoded in it. And since the temple is aligned, whatever that time of year is going to give you the answer, the thing that you need for that temple. So the back to the structure here, we have that top part and then we have the crypt, right? Everything that we're going, it's cathedrals are not when I first noticed or first started looking into them, I thought they were more of a upward vortex, like projecting the sound upward and using that geometry to kind of send something. But the more I researched it, it's the opposite actually. These, we'll call it the signal, comes, yes, top down into the crypt, and the crypt is the focal point of everything. And if you know your geometry,
okay,
you have your 2D layout of the cross, but the 3D version of that, it looks like a 3D cross. The 4D version is a tesseract. The 4D version folds up into a 4D shape that is a tesseract, and then we can go down that rabbit hole, but we'll just keep it short. That is a way of navigating the subtle energy structure of space and time. So tesseract, like if you think of like a XYZ grid in 3D space, tesseract does that in 4 dimensions. So it's a way of mapping or tessellating 4D space. So in my opinion, and I'm not in any tradition or in any secret society or anything like that. I talk to all these people. Don't quote me that this is exact, but I reference a lot of people. I research a lot of the science, but these are still obviously a lot of speculation here. But what we do know is that the main rituals were in the crypts and they were related to sound. Oftentimes there were psychedelics too involved or some sort of medicine. So we have 3 main ingredients: a line temple. We have it's tuned, resonant tuned. They've done a bunch of studies on the silent resonance of cathedrals, and there's always a note that they hit without any other audio involved. They're resonant. They have a crypt, they have a well, and the ceremonies involved an initiation process, oftentimes with psychedelics. So we're dealing with something that is conscious here. It's not just a place of worship, although that was a function of it. It was a place of initiation. It was a place of conscious expansion. And that is the true key. So how do those things interact with each other is what I like exploring, especially from the sound aspect, because if you're been to a music festival or anything like that, you know that there's a different energy there, right? And we can manipulate that energy as artists and kind of steer the narrative however we want. So were they doing this in the cathedrals? Absolutely, they were doing this. They were setting an intention. They were setting a purpose for, initiating someone into this life or the way that they did things. And once they passed the test or whatever, they were part of the brotherhood, and then they helped with the temple science. You got initiated into all of these different aspects of the traditions. There's a lot of conflicting beliefs on that with like the church and all these mosques and even the synagogues, that there's always 2 factions here. It's you're never going to have one. It's not purely good, it's not purely evil. There were bad actors with that, there's bad actors with the other side as well. Both sides, you have to take it with nuance here and kind of blend the 2 together to figure out what was really going on.
Oh, as you say, I mean, it's completely layered, and I feel that it just gets a little bit like the purity gets distorted as soon as that human ego perspective in a way comes in, and there is a power dynamic that is rather like a power over than a power with, and like using this entire grid and the consciousness or misusing what is there for personal power. That's my personal opinion. But yeah.
You're dead on, because the tradition itself was, if you're familiar with psychedelics, it's more of it's an ego death, right? And that's an ego death was the way of figuring out if you were trustworthy or not, right? If your ego cannot handle this test, then you don't get initiated into the tradition, right? But some people can hide that really well. You know? Some people can still go down that path and convince you that they're cool, you know? So if someone is dedicated enough to passing that test and then to using the powers that they're given for nefarious purposes, then we've all seen that. This isn't a, this isn't a shocker. Like this,
Yeah.
especially nowadays when we have the internet and, things get proliferated. If you didn't know, the Vatican is announced that they're about to digitize their entire library and release almost everything that they have, which is super, super cool.
Which is
the Vatican,
and most of it.
I know. Have they done horrible things in the past? Yeah. Have they been kind of a necessary evil in the past? Yeah. So like Freemasonry, Rosicrucian, all these people, there's people that abuse the knowledge, and there's people that try and keep it as pure as possible. And for me, I try and reach out to those sources if I can. But temple science is a very, very closed, if you know type thing. And the reason why I think people are resonating with it so much right now is because they probably resonated with it in the past. You hear me talking about some of this stuff and you're like, why do I feel like I remember that?
Oh yeah. It's like there is a body remembrance, like a cell remembrance.
Exactly. And you can't remember something if you haven't seen it before. That's the whole point of remembering. You're putting back, remember means to put the pieces back together.
Yes.
So you're just reassembling those pieces that whenever you feel something or get an epiphany, or that resonates with you internally. And I think most of my content, the ones I've done really well is based on temple science, because nobody knows really about it and nobody knows that it's a thing. And I try and kind of just leave enough of a clue that you can figure it out for yourself, because I don't feel qualified to go fully down the rabbit hole of temple science. I have probably a lot more data on it than most do, but I didn't build these things, and I haven't been initiated into any tradition, so I do try and keep it very, very neutral with the way I talk about it, because you don't want to give a child a bazooka. If you have the ability to expand your consciousness to the point of disassociating from your body, or like using it to manipulate people, I'm not giving you those tools. I don't want that. I'm just absolutely not going to be the person that.
No, I guess it's also very much the intention with which you put that out. And so I completely feel and see that you're doing it. One thing that I would be super interested in is, because I feel that, a lot of these, and it's actually called temple science, as you named it. It's, to me, still a very much mind-based information in a way. So what happens, like for you personally, when you have all this knowledge accumulated and then you actually go to a site and you get to experience it and feel it? How does that consciousness merge or expand then for you?
Overload, sensory overload. Sensory overload. I'm literally, I have a note on my phone and I'm walking through, I'm like just taking notes on all of the stuff. But that's the whole point of it. The whole point of it was to get people to be interested in, one, how did someone build this? Two, why is it designed like this? Like no one asked that question. Everyone looks at it and it's like the floor to ceiling decor of a Gothic cathedral is awe-inspiring. You will walk in and you'll be like, how? And that's cool. That's cool to like normal reality, but like when you think deeper, you have to think, where's the inspiration coming from for all this? Why did they put the flowers over here? What are the people doing in the carvings? Why are they doing that? And all of it, in most cathedrals that haven't been, tampered with or restored, they have alchemical symbology. That's what it is. It's the process of alchemy, and the process of alchemy is the process of purifying the subtle body, right? The body that lives inside the body of food, as the Hindu tradition would call it, or the sheet of food, I think is what it's called. Yeah, that is the point of it, is to awaken something inside of you and be like, how, what is, pyramids do the same thing. It's they were a tool, yeah, but also they were layered there to open up new pathways in your mind. And I find it so much fun now that I understand these things. It's like walking through a puzzle, like a 3D puzzle. And I get something new every single time I go to one. And that every city I go to, whether it's for music or vacation, I'm like, where's the cathedral? I gotta see this thing. So
I
there's
love that
something, there's
you're
a nugget here.
Yeah, and I love that you're using that analogy because for years, like for me, it has always been that visual of a jigsaw puzzle that I'm putting together. And for years, I was literally just, gathering pieces before I could actually see that, oh, it's a puzzle. And like this piece goes here and this goes here. And so that, yeah.
A weird phenomenon too, when you first start getting into this, is absorbing without letting any of it out, and that leads to that's one of those things that you kind of have to avoid with this stuff. If you are really into this, then holding all of that in is going to make you very conspiracy minded, because you're not working the thoughts out in a way that's logical. So I recommend, if anyone is into temple science, or if you're into just like the mysteries, start off by just make a note on your phone, and if you have an epiphany, write it down, because it's going to get it out of your head, and it's going to make you look for more, because you're not holding on to that thought. You're not holding on to like maybe this is this thing, write it down, and then later maybe, talk about it on the internet, have people have people confer it, like, confirm your idea. That's an easy way to do it, but it's like in sacred geometry. If you don't draw the sacred geometry, then you don't really know the sacred geometry.
Mm,
There's a reason for that. It's because
yeah.
the process of figuring out why sacred geometry is sacred geometry is doing it, because you learn the process of it. And that's temple science too. Sacred geometry was a core concept of temple science and cymatics. So drawing those things out is literally, building pathways in your mind to connect these concepts, and that facilitates your conscious expansion. It facilitates like philosophical expansion, as well as giving you tools to actually operate in real life. It's you can't everyone uses geometry every day, and especially if you're in, working with your hands, or doing some sort of art, it's absolutely necessary. I use sacred geometry in my music and all of my graphic design stuff for my website, or even graphics on the internet. Like there's a reason why it's there, is because it actually works. It's very captivating, and it gets people's attention, because we are pattern recognizing creatures. The more patterns you can recognize, the more your brain is going to be able to synthesize all the data that you're seeing. So start learning the patterns, write the patterns down, what they mean, because symbols symbols are there to convey meaning. We
Hmm.
don't start with and make symbols. Symbols reflect
Yeah.
the meaning.
Yeah.
So once you understand that, once you flip that and flip it from, oh, they were just really artistic. Yeah, where did the art come from? Where did the inspiration come from? There has to be something there to inspire you. And
Yeah.
that's what it is. They're reflecting the geometry of the divine, the sacred geometry.
Sacred geometry is a super good segue because before we were chatting before the interview, you showed me your beautiful flower of life sphere. So I want to, yes, amazing. I love it. So what did you decode about the flower of life yet? What you can share?
Where do you start? Where do you start? So there's a lot of like misconceptions, I think, on the flower of life, and especially that, like, the now that Terrence Howard's talked about it, it's kind of blown up, and people are starting to see the shape more. And so, little background: flower of life has been used in pretty much every culture. I'm sure your audience knows this, and it's one of the oldest symbols in the world, because it's one of the most useful symbols in the world. So the flower of
Hmm.
life, to start off with, is the core of sacred geometry, because you can, if you have a space, any space, to make something in that space, to create within that space, you must have a way of measuring and making things proportionate, right? And to do that, you need circles. Circles are you can get radial symmetry with circles, and you can also get linear symmetry with circles by connecting how the circles intersect. So that is the tool for making buildings proportionate, art proportionate. It works with sound, everything. So all of the basic tools really that we have now in modern society stem from sacred geometry. All of this is, if you look at a computer chip right now, it incorporates sacred geometry. All of the layouts of ancient cities were related to sacred geometry, and this is the first lesson in sacred geometry is figuring out the flower of life, because you have the stages of the flower of life that are a very good way of explaining the creation of the universe, or
Mm-hmm.
how the fundamental laws of the universe work. It's a very easy to understand way of doing that. And it's very easy for kids to learn. They could just draw circles. As long as you have a compass and a straight edge, you have the tools to create anywhere that you want, right? And so that was a big thing. Back to the cathedrals too. They used to have competitions for cathedrals design,
Oh, I
and it
bet
was
they
the
did. Yeah.
students. It was the students of sacred geometry, when they learned the sacred geometry, and you wanted to enter the temple sciences. You submitted your design for a temple, because you were at that point an initiate, and then you were, there's levels to it. And once you start going down that route, then you move up the ladder, and it shows your knowledge. But the flower of life, back to that, the flower of life is a really, really effective tool for teaching even modern concepts. Like, I use it to, like, the natural phenomenon too. Like, you can teach, like, the appropriate tiling of space, like what we were saying. The flower of life gives you a mold, essentially, to make anything that you want within that space. But the cool thing is, if you just do it like in a 3D design software, like you try and draw it freehand, something's always going to be off, because there's inherent proportion built into sacred geometry that you don't even understand.
Mm-hmm.
So within, we can start out with, like, the first two circles create the vesica, right? Within the vesica, the middle there is called the mandorla. It looks like an almond. That's where we get the name almond. It's mandorla. The mandorla, it has the square root of 2, square root of 3, and square root of 5 in it. Those are the measurements if you calculate those. And we're not going to get too into math, don't worry. But the square root of 2 is a binary sequence. The square root of 3 is the division of the cube, and the square root of 5 is the Fibonacci sequence. I maybe
Yeah.
made
Yeah.
those up, actually. But three fundamental universal constants can be attained from two circles. And the more circles you add, the more knowledge you unlock, right? So that's the evolution of that, is what I call the path of the spirit. Sphere it, right? I can show you actually on Geometrics if I share my screen.
I think I have to
I
let
have
you
a
do
really
that, but I
good
can.
graphic for you. It's just to
Yeah.
illustrate, like, it's a very, very easy way of showing the progress of, like, conscious development.
So if you're listening now, head over to YouTube and then you will see what Tyler is sharing.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So from here we have, for those that aren't watching, there's the flower of life is composed of 6 circles with one in the middle, 7 circles total. This is what I call the path of the sphere. It gives you a really good way to start out with sacred geometry if you're just brand new to it. So that first circle, you start with unity, right? That's where everything is connected. Everything is, the all is mind. Everything is part of that. Then you split into polarity by, getting a way to view yourself. The one has to view itself somehow,
To be the mirror.
or it's
Yeah.
just, yes, it has to be the mirror. That is the second circle, and within that second circle, we get pretty much all the definitions of the natural world. But we have no way of looking at that, because if you're just a polarity, you don't know where you are within that polarity. There's two things mixed. It's like hot and cold water. 1 second you could be hot, 1 second you could be cold, but you don't know where you're at within this ocean of hot and cold water, right? So that's the third circle. The third circle defines the Trinity, and the Trinity is the observer perspective. it's how our senses work. It's your eyes are tuned to see a spectrum of color, right? That is your bounds of the senses. But something has to be there to measure those bounds, right? We can only hear 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. That is the frequencies that our ears can measure, right? So the observer is the divine seat that reconciles those polarities. It forms an opinion about what it is. The fourth circle gives you a depth as you go through time. You think of it as like the fourth dimension. If we had the depth in three dimension, the fourth dimension is how that depth happens. Third dimension has height, width, depth, and then we use shadows to kind of illustrate that, right? How things move through space. But to move through space, you have to take your body through time, right? So you're moving through time. That is the architecture of analyzing the 3D space. So that is the fourth step. Five circles is understanding that. That's the what would be the fifth dimension. Five circles is seeing something through time, being able to move around it. If I have this coffee cup, to know how it looks, I have to go around the coffee cup. I have to see bottom of the coffee cup, what's in the coffee cup. That takes time. Those two, your third dimension, your data from the third dimension with your perspective of time forms the fifth dimension, which would be understanding. So you piece all those together, that is the mental dimension. The mental dimension is how we make sense of the world around us. And then you get into the six circles around the first one that you drew. That forms it unlocks harmony within that space. So I can still see that this is a coffee cup, right? But if the coffee cup looks weird and it's shaped weird or it's out of proportion or it doesn't, it just looks like a blob, that is not a harmonious way of making a beautiful coffee cup, right? A harmonious way would be, is it balanced? The coffee cup, can I lift it up, right? Are the colors pleasing to my eye, right? Are the materials something that I like to feel? Well, how do you have those preferences, where do those come from? Where does a preference in general come from? And it's from a proportionate object, or a object that looks like it's in a harmonious environment. And that could be sounds where we have, harmonies in music. That could be color mixing in art where certain tones mix well with others. It could be flavors that taste well together, a scents that mix, a cologne that mixes very well with your body. All of these things, they're not, they don't come from nowhere. They are they're there because of that the sixth dimension, creating the harmonious mixing in reality. So it's just an easy way of getting some rules and some guidelines for how consciousness actually works. And I thought that was probably, from a young age, you could learn it pretty easy. And to me, that it's a really useful tool for doing that.
I would have loved to, in my geometry lessons at school, to learn this.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Okay, there's an even better like plus side to this, because every time I start talking about anything math or numbers, I like, no video does good because people hate math and they hate numbers. Don't hate me because it's hard. Sacred geometry, the one of the main rules of sacred geometry, the first rules, is you don't measure. You don't need to measure. All you need to do is measure the space where you're creating in, and then the proportion after that solves the problem. So there's no math involved. It's you and a compass and a straight edge and whatever you want to create.
It's experiential.
It's experiential, and it's almost like a cheat code, because you know that everything that you make is going to be proportional as long as you follow the simple rules of sacred geometry. So conveying that to people, I think it got it got wrecked in the school system. Like, my geometry classes were horrible. I hated it. I was good at it, but I was like, what? Why do we need to do this? As soon as I learned this, I was like, I'm back in here. I'm in geometry now. Like, this is my stuff. And then now you have the tools to look at these temples and ancient monuments and stuff, and you have an insight that nobody else has. It's wonderful.
It is. It is. What is your favorite temple? Do you have one?
No, okay. So like in terms of like just shock and awe, you can't beat pyramids. Obviously, they're just the biggest things on the planet, and it's just insane, and you'll get lost. That's the gateway to the rabbit hole. But there's so many sites that nobody really talks about, and they don't get enough attention. And if you told me to pick one, I absolutely couldn't. But I think the most interesting one is Baalbek in Lebanon, because the more you look
Mm.
into it, the more it's just layered with all kinds of mystery. Like the it's like the third iteration of that pool, I think, if that we know of. And the things required to do that, in my opinion, are more difficult than the pyramid, just in terms of logistics. They two big things. The trilithon, which is the stones that are from 700 tons to 1,000 tons. There's three of them on the base of Baalbek, which engineering marvel. I talk about it all the time. I'm not going to talk about it here, but it's an engineering marvel that we still cannot figure out. But there's another the columns there. The columns there was I think there was 33 or is either 33 or 54 of them in the temple. They're 83 tons each, and
Wow.
to if no one has an engineering background, 83 tons is absolutely huge, but spinning an 83-ton piece of rock on a lathe to get it perfect, because the edges are not only perfectly, they're laser precise, but they taper on the way up. And they did this because the way the human eye works, if they taper on the way up, it actually makes the temple look bigger. It makes it look proportionate from where you're
Mm.
standing, because no one's going to look at the temple from up
Whoa.
high. So it was a small detail that until engineers looked at it, they didn't know, but it tapers
Small
at
but heavy.
but think about that. Think about how you have to do that. To taper something like that, you have to spin it. We do that today. We put a piece of wood on two ends, spin it really fast, and drag a bit across it, and it creates a circular shape. That's how they had to have done that, or you couldn't
Hmm.
get it that precise. The human hand is just not that precise. So there's just little layered things within Baalbek that are, and the quarry is, you can see the quarry from Baalbek, which is really cool because there's a lot of arguments on like geopolymers and stuff, but the blocks were right there. We have where they picked them up and put them in the temple. So I think that's also really cool, because there's a lot of argument with Giza that they got the rocks from, they quarried the site, and that somehow makes it easier, I guess, for to move 2 million blocks of 18 tons, but whatever. That
Yeah,
that
yeah.
one's probably my favorite one, just because of the mysteries. But I think there are some really interesting ones in Central America that we're recently discovering that will get excavated, that are going to be pretty cool. And there's also all of the ones, I'm fascinated by all of the stuff in China, just because it's so secretive. There's all of those pyramids that have trees on them that they intentionally bury. There's
Yeah.
it's such a mystery over there, that I'm like, that it's on my list of places to go, just so I can like get the local story for this, because I know I'm not getting the real thing here. But in terms of cathedrals, Chartres Cathedral is really good, and Notre Dame, obviously, they're really like kind of the top ones. But there's also Cologne in Germany that in World War
Yeah.
II got bombed like 4 times,
Yeah.
and it's still standing. Like there's still black marks from the bombs and stuff on the stone. Pretty insane. Like there's a lot of wheels that spin in my mind. If something here got bombed like that, we would be screwed. But a cathedral
Mm.
hundreds of years ago is just like, it's like, yeah, I can take it. That's pretty nuts to me.
It's interesting that you mentioned Shasta. I'm going to be visiting next week, so I'm excited. Yeah, it's going to be my first
Oh, no
time.
way.
So,
Oh, you
mhm.
gotta take all the pictures.
I will.
You gotta take all.
And I was just laughing when you mentioned about the start to take notes on your phone, because also that's
Uh-huh.
how I started. And meanwhile, I think I have a whole library, so just be prepared. That is very likely to happen. So,
I am excited for you. This is the problem with being in America, is there's a lot of cool stuff here, but there's not a lot of old stuff here. Like that the European stuff man, you can't compare it to a lot of the stuff here just because it's, Renaissance time. Like that was a different, it's like a genre of music, like the 80s had their own,
Mm-hmm.
like the cathedrals in Europe have their own genre, like tone to them versus the cathedrals here, which are very cool. Like the one in New York is really, really awesome. There's a few in Texas that are pretty cool, but like the ones in, you can't hold a
Yeah.
candle to those. Those were
Yeah.
the original. Those were like the original. These are the remixes. That's you can't beat the OG songs.
But it's a very good way to describe the different frequencies. I
Yeah.
like that. And you know what you said earlier about there's a lot of sites that are being revealed. And even here, I mean, it's different with the cathedrals, but I've done a lot of research actually the last couple of years on megalithic sites, and I was surprised, and you would be surprised how many sites there are. And
Oh yeah.
some of them are accessible, some are not so much, but it's literally like all hidden in plain sight in a way, and nobody cares about it. And there are some stories, but then usually it's kind of like stories covered as a myth or something like that, but it's all
Yeah.
there. And I really feel that a lot of these sites are making themselves known in a way, or people now have the awareness, the consciousness to actually like go and access the wisdom that is stored, especially in the stones. I feel there is like a lot of codes in the stones that can be retrieved. And also what you said about the Chinese pyramids, I keep on joking, but I really feel that there is a truth to that over the next couple of years, a lot of pyramids will reappear on the surface of the earth.
Totally agree. I think it'll actually be almost a necessity at a certain point too, just because so many people are going to be like, why is that still, why are we not looking at this? Like it's going to be an
Yeah.
overwhelming amount of support. And that to me is one of my main like reasons why I still keep posting content is because if enough people know what to look for and know that, that giant block is really impossible to move for us. Like it really truly is. The last time we did that was like a 300-ton rock in LA. That was the last time we moved something that big. And we just don't do it. And no one thinks about that and they don't know what they're looking for though because the megalithic sites have so many layers of like they could almost even be disguised as modern work sometimes because they were
Mm-hmm.
there. They were that advanced that it looks like we just did that, but we did not do that. So there's a lot of I like giving people the tool like the really secret stuff to look for. Like I'm gonna
Bring it
I
on.
gotta shake this. I gotta shake this. So I have this like crazy it's like a content dump where I just like have an idea and I have to make something real quick or I'm gonna forget it. So I'm not gonna share my screen of that because it's absolute chaos. But I'm about to make a post about this, so I feel like you're gonna get I'll give you the exclusive scoop first. That's
Yay!
the
Drum roll.
megalithic stuff is like my favorite thing just because it gets people's attention and a debate going and I like hearing everybody's ideas. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't know about because you're not coming from an engineering perspective and I am. Like I was in my business, my high-res window cleaning business. We did restoration and construction too. So I was around all the construction guys and I saw all of
Mm-hmm.
the things that could go wrong or like the things that they had to plan for. And one of those was like the brick buildings are really kind of not structurally that sound. They're very prone to getting, they're very vulnerable to earthquakes because the force has a weak point within that mortar to find
Mm-hmm.
its way through. And when it does, it's catastrophic for the structure.
Okay.
But what the ancients did is they dispersed the force through what's called polygonal masonry. And there are a bunch of different names for it. So under megalithic architecture, you have polygonal masonry, which is very precise, what I'm showing you now. There's cyclopean masonry, which is found a lot in Greece and like
Mm-hmm.
that whole area. And then there's the stuff that we see like on the third pyramid in my Doom pyramid in Egypt, where the stone has been what looks like almost scooped, like it's cut. You see those little marks. So all of those are the same technique, but they're under the umbrella of megalithic architecture. And the reason why they did this is because there's no point for the force to go when an earthquake hits. So the force hits one of these cracks and they have complex angles. There's this one here has like 8 different angles in one stone.
Yeah.
So when the force travels up, it has to move around the corner and it loses energy every time it makes a right angle.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
if you're not watching, I have a megalithic stone picture here, and it looks literally like a jigsaw puzzle. And the brick buildings, you'll notice here, it goes straight up, straight, 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 right? The reason why that's not applicable here is because the mortar is actually weak. The mortar is really
Mm-hmm.
weak. So it finds
Mm-hmm.
those cracks and it travels up like a puzzle, right? Here, there's no mortar, and it's the hardest stone they could find. So when that earthquake hits, the force goes up and it goes up at an angle, and then it has to make this right turn. It's like, okay, well, I lost half my energy here. Goes over, and then it hits a fork in the road. And it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna split my force down this fork in the road, right? So as you hit that fork, you hit another curve and it goes up. And it's like that's even, you're losing it again. And this
That,
one goes up a jigs like a stair step way and
yeah,
loses almost all
yeah.
of its force by the time it gets to the top. And so they don't react to earthquakes the same way our buildings do. And they're pretty much immune to it.
Wow,
And
that's
that's why they're built on
fascinating.
those points. But the really cool thing, there's another picture of it, but the really cool thing is this little guy. And these were plaguing people for the longest time. These little stones in the big megalithic architecture, right? So what these things actually are like your fuses in your car. So like if you get too much current in going to like your radio, that fuse will blow and your radio will be preserved and you just replace the fuse, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if too big of an earthquake hit an area, what they did was like between the rocks, they have the tiniest little block of, and most of the time it's really hard to like granite. But when that force goes through the rock, that little piece takes all of it and it'll blow out like a fuse where the entire structure will be saved. But
Mm.
the little stone acts like a fuse to save the whole rest of the structure. And
Mm-hmm.
then they can easily put, another little tube in there or fill that up. But you don't see any of them exploded either. So they're so effective, they're not needed, but they're there and people don't know what they're for.
Yeah,
And
no.
I call it the fuse stone, but
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I can definitely see now why temple science is a complete science on its own. So that's
it's
amazing.
it is the science of keeping a building, keeping your idea able to last through time. Like that was not a good way to say that. It's the it's the permanence in a world of impermanence. And that is the core of the science, something that will last longer than you. That's true
Mm-hmm.
immortality. Temple science
Mm-hmm.
is the science of immortality because of that. It's these buildings aren't going anywhere. And they inspire different things from different people, but everyone has to sit there and look at it like, dang, that's amazing.
No, it truly is amazing, and it doesn't stop, to amaze me at least. And I hope that, yeah, a lot of people who are listening and watching now. Whew, that's a lot to process.
There's a lot in there.
Wow, there's a lot in there.
There's a lot
So,
in there.
I obviously we could continue for hours and hours, but I also feel that there was a point where we just need to let all of that, yeah, process and integrate. So I feel how, so what do we do with all of that? Like, how does this knowledge support us? And I want to say like us as humanity to raise our consciousness and with that also the consciousness of the planet.
Really good question. I think it's okay. It's going to be a multifaceted thing, obviously. Understanding temple science, first off, is what I try and convey, at least in my content too, is insanely beneficial for the individual. Just because, like we talked about, we're pattern recognizing creatures, and the more patterns you have in your head to reference, the more you're going to understand. And the more you understand about the patterns, the more you're going to understand about reality, because as above, so below, everything is a reflection, right? So if we see patterns on our level of observation, we can notice the patterns in the cosmos or the microcosm as well. That could lead to advances in anything, right?
Yeah.
That's the more patterns you recognize, the more problems you can solve, just on a personal level. In terms of conscious expansion, I think that the more people that understand this can really settle the turbulence that's going on in the world here. Because if we recognize that, all of these structures from America to Egypt to China, they all share similar techniques, they all share similar styles, they all employ the same principles. At some point in time, this knowledge was pretty common and well known, and it appears to be everyone knew it, and it was pretty easy to do this stuff because there's a lot of it. If there's one pyramid, that would still be impressive, but there's 118 in Egypt. There's even more around the world. There's thousands of pyramids in the world. So it's a synthesizing of culture too. And if you, like we were
Mm,
saying, if you know that cathedrals are based on the temple science of Egypt, well, everything in between that is connected. We have our differences. Humanity has a whole bunch of differences, but I think recognizing that we are coming from the same source of information and we are all actually a part of this.
mm,
This was, whether you're from an ancient tradition or a more new modern tradition, all of it comes from somewhere, and
yeah.
linking that together, it creates more of a social cohesion. Like there was a huge
Hmm.
uproar when they wanted to rebury Göbekli Tepe, and people were, all around the world were crying out, don't do this. It's because these monuments, they keep people together. Like when something bad happens to these ancient things, a lot of people know about it, and a lot of people
Yeah.
get inspired to look into this and to protect these things because they mean something to humanity, to our story. So solidifying that is I think a real imperative for how we move forward as a species and stop all of the conflict. But the most mystical part of it, in my opinion, is the fact that they they take you down the rabbit holes, right? One of those rabbit holes could be your future career. One of those rabbit holes could be something that you use to help with humanity. I talked to a guy that watched one of my videos on cymatics about the anti-inflammatory properties of certain frequencies. And I sent him a whole bunch of research, and he's in the process right now of developing something. Like he's really working on
Oh,
on
that's
some
amazing.
something new that could it potentially help people. I don't know, but like
Yay.
what I do know is he's very passionate about it,
Yeah.
right? And I see more passion in him on something that may not work than I see in. I'm in Austin. I see tech people all day. Then they are mindless doing their typing all the time. In my opinion, it is the best way to figure out what your purpose is. Because if you follow that resonance, like we were talking about, if you follow that thing that makes you excited when you see the temple, or like that fact that really gets your mind going, follow that. That's your sign. That's an indicator that you need to help some way, and that's how you do it. That's
Mm,
no one's gonna tell you what your mission is here, but the feelings will. Your feelings
yeah.
are gonna be the best guide. Follow those. So three aspects of that I think are really, really important. And this stuff is not harming anybody, and it's super interesting, and it's not mind-numbing content. So watch all of it. Just consume it all. Learn all you can about these temples. They're amazing.
Wow, thank you so much. That was mind-blowing. That was heart-opening. That was, yeah, all of it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom. And I feel that there is going to be a lot of people who are intrigued with temple science now and the cymatics.
Yes. My plan is working. Thank you so much for
Oh,
having me on,
God.
though. This is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and take some time to digest all of the information. And I'll see you next time.